It's wonderful to see you all again. I've got an extraordinary tale to tell you today.
Cassandra Vance laughed as she flicked a glob of expensive caviar onto Maya Vance's lapel in front of the entire morning gala. The black pearls of sturgeon roe slid down the lapel of Maya's charcoal blazer, leaving a greasy, salty trail against the fabric. The room, filled with the city's elite and the heavy, cloying scent of 1,000 white lilies, went deathly silent. "Oh, Maya," Cassandra said, her voice carrying easily to the back of the marble foyer. She didn't look remorseful. She looked exhilarated. Her designer black gown, a custom piece that likely cost more than a mid-sized sedan, shimmered under the crystal chandeliers. "I forgot you were standing there. You blend into the shadows so easily in those off-the-rack rags. I suppose that's the life of a bean counter, isn't it?" Maya didn't flinch. She felt the cold moisture of the caviar seeping through her shirt, but her hands remained steady at her sides. She looked at her sister, the woman who had spent the last decade perfecting the art of the viral lifestyle, while Maya had been perfecting the art of the forensic audit. To the 300 guests gathered for the memorial of their mother, Eleanor Vance, Cassandra was the grieving, golden daughter. To Maya, she was a predator in silk. "It's a memorial service, Cassandra," Maya said, her voice low and level. "Try to remember who we're here for." Cassandra leaned in, the smell of her cloying, metallic perfume hitting Maya like a physical blow. "We're here for the transition of power, darling. Mother is gone, and the Vance estate needs a hand that knows how to hold a champagne flute, not a calculator." She turned away with a flick of her perfectly styled hair, gesturing to the man standing behind her. Julian Thorne stepped forward, his hand sliding possessively around Cassandra's waist. He offered Maya a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a smile Maya recognized from a dozen corporate fraud cases. It was the look of a man who had already spent money that didn't belong to him. "Don't take it personally, Maya," Julian said, his voice smooth and condescending. "The stress of the estate sale has us all a bit on edge. You understand, of course. It's best for everyone if we liquidate the manor quickly. It's what your mother would have wanted." "The manor isn't for sale," Maya replied. Cassandra laughed again, a sharp, jagged sound that cut through the low murmur of the crowd. She reached onto a nearby mahogany table and picked up a heavy, cream-colored document. "That's where you're wrong, little sister. I've already signed the preliminary contracts. As the sole executor and primary beneficiary of the Vance Trust, I've decided this old mausoleum is better served as a luxury boutique hotel. Julian and I are flying to Dubai tomorrow to finalize the investment." Maya watched her sister's face. Cassandra's eyes were bright with a terrifying kind of greed, a hunger that had only intensified since Eleanor had passed 3 weeks ago. The speed of the probate, the suddenness of the illness, the way Cassandra had barred Maya from the hospital room, it all hummed like a low-frequency alarm in the back of Maya's mind. Maya reached into her pocket and felt the cool, hard edge of a flash drive. She had spent the last 48 hours buried in the digital shadows of the Vance family accounts. She wasn't just a bean counter. She was a hunter of missing commas and vanished millions. "You seem very certain of your standing," Maya said, her gaze shifting to the document in Cassandra's hand. "I'm certain of the law," Cassandra snapped. She stepped onto the bottom stair of the grand staircase, raising her glass to the room. "Attention, everyone, a toast to the memory of Eleanor Vance and to the bright, profitable future of the Vance Thorne Empire." The guests raised their glasses, the sound of crystal clinking filling the hall. Maya stood alone in the center of the floor, the caviar stain a dark mark on her chest. She saw Marcus Thorne, Julian's brother and a high-powered attorney, watching her from the corner of the room. He didn't join the toast. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes stayed locked on Maya. Maya turned and walked toward the library, her heels clicking rhythmically against the checkered marble. She didn't need to stay for the performance. She had seen enough. The way Cassandra's hand had trembled slightly when she held the document, the way Julian had avoided looking at the portrait of Eleanor hanging above the mantel, it was a symphony of guilt. Inside the library, The air was cooler, smelling of old paper and beeswax. Maya sat at her mother's desk and opened her laptop. She plugged in the flash drive and watched the screen flicker to life. A series of encrypted files began to decrypt, a slow crawl of green bars against the black background. She pulled a single sheet of paper from her blazer, a copy of the signature on the estate transfer Cassandra had filed. Maya compared it to the handwritten notes in her mother's old ledger. To the untrained eye, they were identical. But Maya saw the hesitation marks, the microscopic tremors in the ink where a forger had paused to check their work. Her phone buzzed on the desk. A text from an unknown number. The signatures aren't the only thing they faked. Check the hospice records for the night of the 14th. Maya's breath hitched. She looked at the portrait of her mother on the desk. Eleanor Vance had been a woman of iron and grace, a woman who would never have left her estate to a daughter she knew was a parasitic socialite. She began to type, her fingers flying across the keys with surgical precision. If Cassandra wanted a war of status and public image, she would have it. But Maya was playing a different game. She was dismantling the foundation of her sister's world, brick by fraudulent brick. She heard the library door creak open. She didn't look up. She knew the heavy, expensive tread of Julian's loafers. "Maya," he said, his voice dropping the facade of politeness. "Cassandra wants you to leave. Now. You're making the guests uncomfortable with that aura of yours." Maya finally looked up, her eyes cold and clinical. "Tell my sister I'll be gone soon, but tell her one more thing." Julian narrowed his eyes. "What?" "The ashes in that urn on the mantel," Maya said, pointing toward the foyer. "They're remarkably light for a woman of mother's stature. I'd be very careful about what I signed if I were you, Julian. Fraud is a very difficult stain to wash out." Julian's face went pale, the color draining from his cheeks until he matched the white lilies in the hall. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Maya closed her laptop with a decisive snap. She stood up, straightened her stained blazer, and walked past him without a second glance. She had 2 days until the first board meeting of the Vance Foundation. 2 days to prove that the lion wasn't dead. She was just waiting for the right moment to strike. The next morning, the silence of the Vance estate was shattered not by the soft tolling of a funeral bell, but by the rhythmic, artificial ping of social media notifications. Cassandra stood in the grand foyer, silhouetted against the morning light, her face a mask of practiced, ethereal sorrow. She adjusted a professional ring light, her eyes darting to the screen of her phone to ensure her tears caught the glint of the lens. "I just want to thank my community for holding space for me," Cassandra whispered into the microphone, her voice trembling with a rehearsed sob. She was draped in black silk that cost more than a mid-sized sedan, but it was the jewelry that caught the eye, a heavy string of South Sea pearls that had belonged to their mother. Maya watched from the shadows of the hallway, her fingers tightening around the strap of her laptop bag. The scent of expensive lilies, arranged in towering, performative displays, cloyed in the air, thick and suffocating. It was the smell of a lie being told in high definition. "Oh, you're still here," Cassandra said the moment the recording stopped. Her face transformed instantly, the grief vanishing to reveal a sharp, predatory coldness. She flicked an invisible piece of lint off her sleeve, her gaze raking over Maya's simple, charcoal gray blazer with visceral disgust. "I thought I told Julian to have the locks changed by sunrise." "I came to get the rest of my research files," Maya said, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her chest. "And to ask why you're wearing Mother's pearls. Those were promised to me in the 2018 codicil, and you know it." Cassandra laughed, a high, brittle sound that echoed off the marble floors. She stepped closer, the smell of her cloying, designer perfume invading Maya's personal space. "Promises are for people who matter, Maya. You're a glorified bookkeeper. You don't have the status to carry these off, let alone the wardrobe. Besides," she smirked, touching the pearls with a manicured nail, "the estate is being liquidated. Julian and I have already signed the preliminary contracts for the house and the foundation's assets. By the time the board meeting happens in 48 hours, you'll be nothing but a footnote in the Vance history." Maya didn't flinch. She felt the cold, rectangular weight of an encrypted hard drive in her pocket. While Cassandra had been busy curating an aesthetic of loss for her followers, Maya had spent the night in a motel room, bypassing the security protocols of the Vance Foundation's digital ledger. Cassandra thought she was playing a game of influence, but Maya was playing a game of forensic mathematics. 48 hours, Maya repeated softly. That's a very specific deadline, Cassandra. Is that when the first payment to Julian's investment firm is scheduled to clear? The color in Cassandra's cheeks shifted from a blush-on pink to a blotchy, panicked red. I don't know what you're talking about. You're broke, Maya. You're wearing a suit from a clearance rack and driving a car that's 10 years old. Who is going to listen to a bitter, disinherited auditor? The numbers will, Maya replied. She turned and walked toward the heavy oak doors, the sound of her sensible heels a sharp contrast to the soft, expensive thud of Cassandra's designer mules. Once inside her car, Maya pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in 3 years. Marcus Thorne, a deep, authoritative voice answered on the second ring. Marcus, it's Maya Vance. I have the ledger. I need you to look at the offshore transactions from the Cayman branch dated the 14th, the day a leaner allegedly fell ill. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. If the timestamps don't match the medical records, Maya, this isn't just a civil dispute. It's a criminal conspiracy. They don't match, Maya said, her eyes tracking Cassandra through the grand window of the estate. Her sister was already back to filming another take, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. My sister thinks her followers are her jury. She doesn't realize I've already seated the judge. I'll have the injunction paperwork ready by tomorrow morning, Marcus said. Make it the afternoon, Maya directed, a cold, predatory smile finally touching her lips as she shifted the car into gear. I want her to spend one more night feeling untouchable. The higher she climbs her golden ladder, the more bones she'll break when I kick it out from under her. As she drove away, Maya checked the digital clock on her dashboard. 47 hours and 52 minutes until the board meeting. The countdown had begun, and the sleeping lion was no longer just watching. She was closing in. 2 days later, the air in Marcus Thorne's private study felt thick with the scent of cedarwood and the electric hum of a high-speed scanner. Maya Vance stood by the window, watching the rain streak against the glass like tears on a face that had forgotten how to cry. She didn't turn when the heavy oak door clicked shut. It's better than we thought, Marcus said, his voice low and steady. He dropped a thick manila folder onto the mahogany desk. Or worse, depending on how much soul you think your sister has left. Maya turned, her fingers brushing the cool, polished surface of the desk as she reached for the file. Inside lay the crown jewel of Cassandra's desperation, a forged life insurance claim. It wasn't just a move for the estate. It was a direct grab for a 7-figure payout based on a death certificate that bore a signature Marcus had already flagged as a digital composite. She's not just stealing a house, Maya whispered, her eyes scanning the fraudulent lines. She's selling our mother's ghost before the body is even cold. Julian Thorne is the one who facilitated the offshore routing, Marcus added, leaning back. He adjusted his cufflink, the gold catching the dim light. He's been using the Vance family holdings as collateral for a series of failing tech acquisitions. If this insurance money doesn't hit their account by Friday, his entire firm collapses. They aren't just greedy, Maya. They're drowning. A small, cold spark of satisfaction flickered in Maya's chest. This was the weapon, the undeniable proof of criminal intent that would do more than just stop a sale. It would dismantle a dynasty. She tucked the flash drive containing the digital trail into her inner coat pocket, the small piece of plastic feeling heavier than gold. The preparation moved from the shadows of the law office to the sterile, blinding luxury of the velvet atelier later that afternoon. Maya had received the invitation via a mass blast social media post. Cassandra was hosting a legacy celebration at the city's most exclusive boutique to debut her new line of morning wear. The boutique smelled of lilies and ozone. Maya stepped through the glass doors, her modest trench coat a stark contrast to the sea of silk and sequins. At the center of the room, Cassandra Vance stood on a velvet-dossed pedestal, draped in black chiffon that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. She was holding a flute of champagne, her laughter ringing out like breaking glass as she entertained a circle of nodding socialites. Julian stood beside her, his hand possessively on her waist, looking every bit the grieving but stoic son-in-law. "Oh, look," Cassandra said, her voice carrying across the room as she spotted Maya. The circle of guests parted like a wound opening. "The prodigal sister has arrived. Did you come to see what real elegance looks like, or are you just here for the free catering? I imagine the Audit business has been." Lean. A ripple of polite, cruel laughter went through the crowd. Julian smirked, his eyes raking over Maya with dismissive contempt. "Now, Cassie, be nice. Maya's always had a penchant for the utilitarian look. It's hard to appreciate couture when you spend your life counting other people's pennies." Maya didn't flinch. She felt the weight of the flash drive against her ribs. She took a step forward, her heels silent on the thick cream carpet. "I'm not here for the clothes, Cassandra. I'm here to make sure you're prepared for tomorrow's board meeting. It would be a shame if you were underdressed for the occasion." Cassandra stepped down from the pedestal, her eyes narrowing. She leaned in close, the scent of her cloying perfume filling the space between them. "Tomorrow, I'm being named the sole conservator of the Vance legacy. You'll be lucky if I let you keep your childhood scrapbooks. I'm the face of this family now. You're just a footnote that I'm about to erase." "You've always been good at fiction," Maya replied, her voice a calm, chilling contrast to Cassandra's hissed venom. "But even the best stories need a believable ending." Julian stepped in, his tone warning. "You're making a scene, Maya. Leave before I have security show you the service entrance. You don't belong in a room like this." Maya looked at him, then back at her sister. She saw the frantic glitter in Cassandra's eyes, the look of a gambler who had bet everything on a hand that was about to be called. "Enjoy the champagne," Maya said, her gaze sweeping over the witnesses who were already whispering into their phones. "It's the last thing you'll be having on the estate's tab." She turned and walked out, the bell above the door chiming with a finality that none of them understood yet. Outside, Detective Elias Reed was waiting in an unmarked sedan. Maya slid into the passenger seat, the cold rain finally starting to soak through her shoulders. She handed him a duplicate of the flash drive. "You're sure about the timing?" Reed asked, his eyes fixed on the boutique's glowing windows. "The board meeting starts at 2 p.m. tomorrow," Maya said, her voice devoid of hesitation. "They'll have the champagne ready to celebrate their victory. That's when I want the handcuffs to come out." "It's a long fall from that pedestal," the detective noted. Maya leaned her head back against the seat, watching the countdown clock on the dashboard. 21 hours. "I didn't push her," Maya said softly. "I just stopped catching her." The following afternoon, the Vance estate felt less like a home and more like a stage being set for a tragedy. Maya Vance stood in the grand foyer, the scent of white lilies, Cassandra's favorite, chosen for their funereal elegance, cloying and heavy in the air. The house was a hive of activity as caterers moved silver trays and polished the mahogany banisters in preparation for tomorrow's board meeting. Cassandra was at the center of it all, draped in a cream silk robe that cost more than Maya's entire wardrobe. She was gesturing toward a portrait of their mother, Eleanor Vance, that hung above the fireplace. "Move it to the attic," Cassandra snapped, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. She didn't look at the workmen, her attention fixed on a clipboard. "It doesn't fit the new aesthetic. Julian wants something more modern for the rebranding." Julian Thorne stood by the window, swirling a glass of amber scotch despite the early hour. The ice clinked sharply against the crystal. He didn't look up, his eyes fixed on the manicured gardens he already considered his own. "The buyers are coming at 3 tomorrow, Cass. Let's make sure the place doesn't look like a shrine to the past." Maya felt the cold weight of the flash drive in her pocket, a sharp contrast to the artificial warmth of the house. She stepped forward, her heels clicking rhythmically against the checkered marble. The sound made Cassandra turn, her expression shifting instantly from professional greed to sharpened contempt. "Still here, Maya?" her sister asked, her voice dripping with a feigned pity that made Maya's skin crawl. She stepped closer, the musky, expensive scent of her perfume overpowering the lilies. I thought I made it clear yesterday. Your presence is distracting. The help is starting to wonder why the family charity case is still lurking in the hallways. I'm just making sure everything is in order, Maya said, her voice a calm, steady anchor against Cassandra's frantic energy. It would be a shame if something was overlooked. A small detail can ruin an entire production. Cassandra laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. She reached out, flicking a stray thread on Maya's blazer with a sneer. You always were obsessed with details. That's why you're an auditor and I'm the one running this empire. You see the trees, I own the forest. Forests can burn, Cassandra, Maya replied softly. She held her sister's gaze, refusing to blink, especially when the ground is soaked in gasoline. Julian finally looked over, his brow furrowing as he set his glass on a side table. What's that supposed to mean? It means I hope you've checked the foundations, Maya said, turning her attention to him. The estate has a way of holding onto things, secrets, debts, people. Marcus Thorne entered the room then, carrying a stack of legal folders. He looked every bit the high-powered attorney Cassandra believed he was, his face a mask of professional indifference. He caught Maya's eye for a fraction of a second, a silent confirmation that the trap was set, before turning to Cassandra with a practiced, deferential smile. The final transfer papers are ready for the board's signature tomorrow, Cassandra, Marcus said. Everything is proceeding exactly as planned. Perfect, Cassandra purred, leaning back against the marble mantelpiece. She looked at Maya, her eyes bright with a cruel triumph. Do you hear that? Tomorrow, the Vance name becomes a brand and you become a footnote. I'd offer you a seat at the meeting, but we only have room for stakeholders, people who actually matter. Maya didn't flinch. She simply adjusted the strap of her bag, feeling the weight of the real documents inside. I wouldn't miss it for the world. In fact, I think tomorrow will be the most honest day this family has had in years. Cassandra rolled her eyes, turning back to the caterers. Whatever helps you sleep in that tiny apartment of yours, just be gone by tonight. I don't want your gloom rubbing off on the champagne. Maya walked toward the door, her heart beating with a cold, precise rhythm. She stopped at the threshold and looked back one last time. The sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows across the foyer. In the dimming light, Cassandra looked small against the vastness of the house she was trying to steal. Sleep well, Cassandra, Maya said, her voice carrying a finality that made Julian pause. Tomorrow is a big day. You'll want to be well rested for the fall. She stepped out into the cooling evening air, the countdown in her head hitting the 18-hour mark. The stage was set, the witnesses were invited, and the ghost was ready to speak. The evening arrived with a heavy, cloying scent of lilies that seemed to coat the back of Maya's throat. It was a funeral smell, weaponized by a woman who hadn't shed a single tear. Maya Vance stood at the perimeter of the estate's grand patio, watching the transformation of her childhood home into a high society stage. The gardens were bathed in a haunting violet light, and a string quartet played a somber, expensive arrangement of a cello suite that echoed off the stone walls. She adjusted the cuff of her charcoal blazer, her fingers brushing the cold, jagged edge of the flash drive tucked into her inner pocket. It felt like a shard of ice against her ribs. She wasn't here to mourn. She was here to preside over a different kind of ending. There she is, a voice dripped with practiced sympathy. Cassandra Vance drifted toward her, a vision in black silk that probably cost more than Maya's annual rent. She held a crystal flute of vintage champagne, her eyes scanning Maya with the clinical detachment of a predator checking for a weak spot. I honestly didn't think you'd show up looking like that. It's a memorial gala, Maya, not a parent-teacher conference. Maya met her gaze, her expression a mask of professional neutrality. I'm here to ensure everything goes exactly as planned, Cassandra. Cassandra laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that cut through the music. She turned to a group of socialites standing nearby, including the mayor's wife. You'll have to excuse my sister. She's always been the practical one. While I was handling the estate and mother's final arrangements, Maya was busy with her spreadsheets. I suppose grief manifests in very drab ways for some people. The women offered tight, uncomfortable smiles. One of them leaned in, whispering loud enough for Maya to hear. Is it true? I heard she had some personal struggles. That's why she's been away. Oh, we don't talk about the lost years, Cassandra sighed, placing a delicate hand over her heart. It's been a long road of recovery for her. I'm just happy she's stable enough to be in a crowd again, even if she didn't bother to visit the stylist I sent to her apartment. Maya felt the heat of the public lie prickle at her skin, but she didn't flinch. She watched the way Cassandra's throat moved as she sipped the champagne, the arrogance of a woman who believed she had rewritten history. She caught the eye of Marcus Thorne across the lawn. The attorney was deep in conversation with a group of investors, but he gave Maya a single, imperceptible nod. The legal anchors were set. Where is Julian? Maya asked, her voice calm. My husband is busy securing the future of this family, Cassandra snapped, her mask slipping for a fraction of a second. Something you wouldn't understand. He's in the library with the buyers. Real estate waits for no one, not even the dead. Maya tilted her head. The buyers? I thought tonight was about Mother's legacy. Money is the only legacy that matters in this zip code, Cassandra whispered, leaning close enough for Maya to smell the expensive, floral perfume that masked the scent of the lilies. By tomorrow, this house will be a memory, and you'll be back in your little cubicle, counting other people's fortunes. Enjoy the appetizers, Maya. They're the only thing you're getting out of this inheritance. She swept away, her heels clicking a rhythmic, predatory beat against the marble. Maya watched her go, then felt a presence at her elbow. The fraud investigator is in position, Marcus whispered, pretending to check his watch. Detective Elias Reed is near the buffet, posing as a guest from the city's historical society. He's already seen the forged signatures on the preliminary sale agreement Julian is passing around in the library. And the guest of honor? Maya asked. Waiting in the car at the end of the drive, Marcus replied. She's tired of being a ghost, Maya. She's ready to come home. Maya's pulse quickened, a cold thrum of adrenaline. She looked toward the library windows, where the silhouette of Julian Thorne was visible. He was gesturing wildly, likely inflating the estate's value to cover the gaping hole in his Ponzi scheme. He looked like a man who thought he had just won the lottery, unaware that the ticket in his hand was about to ignite. She began to move through the crowd, navigating the sea of designer labels and forced condolences. She stopped near the grand staircase, where a large projector screen had been set up for the tribute video Cassandra had curated. It was supposed to be a montage of a leaner Vance's life, a carefully edited lie designed to make the sale of the estate look like a charitable necessity. Ladies and gentlemen, Julian's voice boomed from the balcony above, drawing the crowd's attention. He stood beside Cassandra, his arm looped possessively around her waist. If I could have your attention, tonight is a difficult night, but it is also a night of transition. As we remember the late Alina Vance, we look toward the future. The crowd went quiet. The only sound was the wind whistling through the ancient oaks surrounding the patio. Maya reached into her pocket and gripped the flash drive. She saw Detective Reed move closer to the stairs, his hand resting near his jacket. My wife has put together a small tribute, Julian continued, his smile reaching his eyes but not his soul. A look back at the woman who built this empire. Before we finalize the plans for the Vance Memorial Foundation, let's take a moment to see what we are all here to protect. Cassandra looked down at Maya from the balcony, a smirk of pure triumph etched onto her face. She mouthed the words, "Watch and learn." The lights began to dim. The string quartet faded into a low, somber hum. The projector hummed to life, casting a bright, white square against the screen. Maya stepped toward the control console hidden behind a floral arrangement, her heart beating with a cold, precise rhythm. She swapped the designated drive for the one in her hand. This is for you, Cassandra, Maya whispered to the empty air. The most honest day this family has ever had. The screen flickered, but instead of the childhood photos Cassandra expected, a grainy, high-definition video feed appeared. It wasn't a montage. It was a live feed from a room upstairs, and the person sitting in the chair was very much alive. The silence that fell over the garden wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum, sucking the air out of the lungs of every guest present. Cassandra's glass slipped from her hand, the crystal shattering against the stone with a sound like a gunshot. The sharp, crystalline ring of the shattered flute lingered in the air, a funeral bell for the charade Cassandra Vance had spent 6 months perfecting. The garden, once filled with the rhythmic clinking of silverware and polished laughter, was now so silent that the low, mechanical whir of the projector sounded like a roar. On the massive screen, the live feed remained steady. Eleanor Vance sat in a high-backed armchair in the attic suite, calmly turning the page of a book, her profile unmistakable, her existence undeniable. Cassandra didn't scream. She didn't even move. The transformation of her face was a slow-motion car crash of vanity and terror. Her features didn't just pale, they seemed to liquefy, the carefully applied porcelain foundation cracking as her jaw hung uselessly slack. The predatory spark in her eyes vanished, replaced by a hollow, frantic vibration as her pupils darted between the screen and the silent, judging crowd. Her skin took on a sickly, grayish-green hue, matching the moss on the garden stones, while a fine sheen of cold sweat broke across her forehead, matting her perfectly styled hair. Every ounce of her manufactured poise evaporated, leaving behind a trembling shell that looked smaller, older, and utterly defeated. She looked like a ghost seeing a living person for the first time. "The wine is a bit dry, isn't it?" Maya Vance asked, her voice cutting through the stillness like a scalpel. She stepped out from behind the floral arrangement, her movements fluid and deliberate. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The power in the garden had shifted so violently that the air felt thin. Julian Thorne was the first to break the paralysis. He reached for his wife's arm, his face a mottled, angry purple. He tugged at his silk tie, his chest heaving as he looked toward the estate gates, but Marcus Thorne was already there, blocking the path with a folder tucked under his arm and a look of grim satisfaction. Nearby, Detective Elias Reed stepped into the light of a paper lantern, his silver badge catching the glow. He didn't move toward them yet. He simply watched, a hunter waiting for the prey to realize the trap was shut. The guests, the elite of the city who had toasted to Cassandra's tragic loss only an hour ago, began to recoil. Mrs. Sterling, who had been whispering about the inheritance earlier, pulled her silk shawl tight around her shoulders and stepped back as if Cassandra were contagious. The mayor turned his head away, staring at his shoes in profound embarrassment. "It's a deep fake," Cassandra finally choked out, her voice a thin, raspy shadow of its usual trill. She pointed a shaking finger at the screen. "Maya, you're insane. You've always been jealous. This is a projection, a lie." Maya didn't argue. She tapped a key on the console. The video feed of their mother shrunk to a corner of the screen and a spreadsheet replaced it. It wasn't just a list of numbers, it was a map of a massacre. "This is the resurrection audit," Maya said, her eyes fixed on her sister. "The first tab shows the $3 million you transferred from our mother's medical trust to an offshore account the day after you declared her dead. The second tab shows the forged signatures on the deed to this estate, which Julian tried to collateralize for his failing Ponzi scheme. And the third," Maya paused, letting the scent of damp earth and expensive perfume hang heavy in the air. "The third is the GPS log from the private care facility, where you've been keeping her drugged and hidden in the west wing of this very house, while you sold her jewelry to pay for this party." A collective gasp rippled through the garden. It was the sound of 1,000 reputations being recalculated. "You said I didn't belong here, Cassandra," Maya said, walking toward her sister until she was inches away. She could smell the sour scent of panic coming off her. "You said I was just the help, but a forensic auditor is never just the help. We're the ones who turn the lights on when the roaches are eating the cake." The French doors at the top of the veranda creaked open. The projector light caught a figure standing in the doorway, supported by a cane but standing tall. Eleanor Vance looked down at the daughter who had buried her alive, her silence more devastating than any scream. Maya leaned in, her voice a cold, final whisper. "The police are in the foyer. The locks are being changed in 20 minutes, and I've already filed the injunction to freeze every cent you stole. Enjoy the champagne, Cassandra. It's the last thing you'll ever taste that you didn't have to earn in a cafeteria." Without waiting for a response, Maya turned her back on the wreckage of her sister's life and walked toward the gates. She didn't look back at the flashing blue lights reflecting off the marble statues, nor at the sound of Detective Reed finally clicking his handcuffs. She simply kept walking into the cool, honest night. The silence that followed Maya's departure was heavier than the humid night air. On the veranda, the only sound was the rhythmic, hollow thud of Vance's cane against the stone tiles as she took a single step forward. The projector, still humming, cast a ghoulish white light over the scene, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny witnesses to a funeral. Cassandra Vance didn't just pale. Her face seemed to physically structuralize into a mask of raw, jagged terror. The carefully contoured lines of her cheeks collapsed as her jaw hung slack, her mouth working wordlessly like a fish pulled from water. Her eyes, once sharp with predatory arrogance, became frantic, dilated orbs that refused to settle on the mother she had declared dead and buried. A frantic, rhythmic twitch took hold of her left eyelid, and sweat began to bead along her hairline, turning her expensive blowout into limp, damp strands that clung to her neck. The regal socialite was gone, replaced by a trembling, cornered animal, her skin turning a sickly, translucent gray under the harsh, artificial glow. "Mother!" The word was a strangled rasp, barely audible over the crickets. Eleanor didn't answer. She didn't have to. The mere fact of her breathing was the ultimate indictment. The socialites who had been sipping Cassandra's vintage crystal only moments ago began to recoil. Mrs. Sterling, who had spent the evening praising the host's grace and grief, took a physical step back, her silk heels clicking sharply on the marble. She looked at the woman beside her with a mixture of revulsion and fear, as if Cassandra were a ticking bomb. The movement was infectious. A slow-motion ripple of abandonment swept through the crowd, creating a wide, empty circle around the woman who had, until 5 minutes ago, been the queen of the estate. Detective Elias Reed stepped out of the shadows of the foyer, his heavy boots sounding a drumbeat of inevitable justice. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. He held a pair of steel handcuffs that caught the blue flicker of the patrol cars now lining the driveway. "Cassandra Vance," Reed said, his voice a low, gravelly anchor in the chaos. "You are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and the falsification of legal death records. This is a mistake." She shrieked, the sound cracking as her voice reached a desperate, shrill register. She turned toward her husband, reaching out a hand weighted with a 5-carat diamond. "Julian, tell them Maya is lying. Tell them this woman is an imposter." Julian Thorne didn't move toward her. Instead, he adjusted the cuff of his designer suit and took a deliberate step toward the detective. The arrogance that had defined him all evening had vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating look of self-preservation. He didn't look at his wife, he looked at the floor. "I had no idea," Julian muttered, his voice loud enough for the nearest witnesses to hear. "She told me the doctors had signed off. She handled all the paperwork. I was just as deceived as the rest of you." The betrayal hit her harder than the impending handcuffs. Her hand dropped, the diamond ring catching the light one last time before she slumped. The man who had helped her plan the sale of the estate was now building his own lifeboat out of her wreckage. Marcus Thorne stepped forward then, opening a leather-bound folder. He didn't look at Julian, despite their shared name. His focus was entirely on the legal incineration of the woman before him. "As of 10 minutes ago," Marcus stated, his voice ringing with professional finality, "the Vance estate has been placed under an emergency receivership. Every account you've touched in the last 6 months is frozen. The locks on this property are being changed as we speak. You have no standing here, Cassandra. You are a trespasser in a house that was never yours to inherit." The sharp click of the handcuffs was the final period at the end of a long, crooked sentence. As Reed pulled her arms behind her back, The smell of expensive lilies and ozone from the approaching storm filled the air. Cassandra began to sob, a messy, ugly sound that lacked any of the poise she had cultivated for her followers. She looked toward the gate, perhaps hoping for one last glimpse of her sister, but Maya was long gone. "You can't do this," she wailed as Reed began to lead her toward the stairs. "I built this. My brand, my life, everything is in this house." "Actually," Elinor spoke for the first time, her voice like dry parchment, "everything in this house belongs to the daughter who didn't try to cremate me while I was still drawing breath." The witnesses watched in a stunned, judgmental silence as the fallen influencer was marched down the grand staircase. The blue and red lights of the police cruisers strobed against the white columns of the mansion, turning the symbol of her stolen wealth into a cage. One by one, the guests began to leave, dropping their half-full glasses on the stone floor, eager to distance themselves from the stench of a crumbling empire. By the time the last patrol car pulled away, the only person left on the veranda was Elinor. She stood tall, leaning on her cane, watching the red taillights disappear into the dark. The house was silent, the lights of the projector finally flickering out, leaving the estate in a cold, honest darkness. The reign of the liar was over, and the silence that remained was the only peace the Vance family had known in years. 6 months had passed since the silence first settled over the Vance estate, a heavy, honest quiet that had finally replaced the frantic noise of Cassandra's lies. Maya Vance sat in the library, the morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The room no longer smelled of the cloying, expensive lilies Cassandra used to order by the truckload to mask the scent of the house's age. Now it smelled of old paper, lemon wax, and the crisp, neutral scent of a workspace. Maya adjusted her glasses, her eyes scanning the final recovery report Marcus Thorne had delivered an hour ago. Every cent stolen through the fake foundation had been tracked, frozen, and returned to the family trust. The forensic audit was complete. She had dismantled her sister's empire with the same cold, surgical precision she used to balance a ledger. A soft knock at the door made her look up. Marcus stood in the entryway, his usual charcoal suit replaced by a more relaxed navy blazer. He looked at Maya, then at the sprawling estate grounds visible through the window. "The final signatures are in," Marcus said, his voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. "The court has officially stripped Julian Thorne of all claims to the subsidiary holdings. Between the Ponzi scheme and the estate fraud, he's looking at 15 years. Minimum." Maya nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of the mahogany desk. "And my sister. Cassandra's sentencing was finalized this morning," he replied, stepping further into the room. "The judge wasn't moved by her claims of emotional distress. She's been moved to the state facility. No more private wings, Maya. No more silk sheets." The image of Cassandra in a sterile, gray cell flashed through Maya's mind. She thought of the way her sister used to sneer at the common people from the window of her Mercedes, and the irony tasted like cold iron. 2 days later, Maya found herself sitting behind a thick pane of plexiglass in a room that smelled of industrial floor wax and stale coffee. When the heavy steel door at the far end of the room groaned open, the woman who stepped through was unrecognizable. Cassandra Vance had always been a creature of light and fabric, a carefully curated image of perfection. Now, the perfection was gone. Her hair, once a shimmering curtain of gold, was limp and dull, pulled back into a messy knot. The designer gowns had been replaced by a pilled, scratchy orange jumpsuit that hung off her frame. Without her makeup, her face looked sallow, the lines of bitterness around her mouth etched deep into her skin. She sat down, the plastic chair screeching against the linoleum. She didn't pick up the phone. She just stared at Maya with a look of pure, unadulterated venom. Maya picked up her receiver. She waited. Finally, with a jerky, frustrated motion, Cassandra followed suit. "Are you happy now?" Cassandra's voice was thin, stripped of its performative elegance. "You took everything. My home, my reputation, my husband. You're sitting in my chair, living in my house, wearing my mother's jewelry." "It was never your house, Cassandra," Maya said, her voice steady and calm. And you didn't lose your reputation. You just finally showed everyone who you actually were. I didn't have to do much. I just stopped helping you hide. Cassandra leaned forward, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. I was the one who kept this family relevant. You were just the mouse in the corner, counting the pennies while I built the brand. You owe me, Maya. I know you still have the offshore accounts Marcus couldn't find. If you give me the access codes, I can hire a real legal team. I can get an appeal. I can. The offshore accounts are gone, Maya interrupted. I found them 3 weeks ago. I donated the entire balance to the hospice center that actually cared for the people you scammed. The color drained from Cassandra's face, leaving it a ghostly, sickly gray. Her mouth opened, then closed, her breath hitching in the quiet room. For the first time in her life, she looked small, truly, pathetically small. You're leaving me here with nothing, Cassandra whispered. You have exactly what you earned, Maya replied. She hung up the phone and stood, watching her sister scream something behind the glass. A silent, jagged tantrum that no one would ever hear. Maya walked out of the facility and into the bright, late afternoon sun. She drove back to the estate, the tires humming against the gravel driveway. As she stepped onto the veranda, she saw a leaner Vance sitting in a wicker chair, a knitted shawl over her shoulders. Her mother looked older, the trauma of the fake death having left a permanent weariness in her eyes, but she was peaceful. Maya sat on the steps beside her. The victory was absolute, the justice proportional. She had her home back. She had her mother back. But as she looked out over the rolling green hills of the Vance estate, she felt the phantom weight of the sister she had lost long before the fraud began. The empire was secure, the liars were gone, and the silence was finally, mercifully, honest.
I hope you enjoyed this tale. Please subscribe to support the channel. Goodbye for now.